Hey, I'm Zach.
And I'm Jesse.
And you're watching In Depth
on Now You Know. Brought to you, as always, by our wonderful Patreon patrons who help support this show, which is the whole reason you're watching it.
And brought to you by abetterrouteplanner.com. They've had over 13 million trips planned, and there's a new app for Android and Apple making it even easier to use a Better Route Planner. So plan your next EV trip with abetterrouteplanner.com.
And we're supported by ecoware.us. Start positive conversations with carbon negative products. We carbon offset the production, shipping, and life cycle of every product, and we plant a tree for every order. So it is extremely carbon negative, which means that whatever message you want to display on your shirt is going to be a carbon negative message on a carbon negative shirt. So this week we have something to talk about that isn't particularly how should we say, in your face.
Yeah, this is a tale about human nature and that very annoying human trait that can be summed up in a phrase you've heard many times before.
Out of sight, out of mind.
So what are we talking about here?
We're talking about underground storage tanks, or USTs.
Yeah, these are tanks that store things like gasoline and diesel. You know, you've seen them at the gas station.
No, you haven't, because they're underground.
And we're talking about those home heating fuel tanks. Like right here in the Northeast, it's very common. You have a tank, sometimes it's in your basement, but very often it's buried somewhere on your property, and a big fuel truck comes every couple months and tops off your tank.
I remember there being big tanks in the basement. I was afraid. I thought they were monsters.
Yeah, when you were little, we had fuel tanks in the basement, two 275-gallon tanks, and the basement always stunk of diesel fuel. And so we decided to switch and get off of oil, and we switched to natural gas, which is what we have now, and hopefully someday soon we won't even have that. But many people got these tanks during the 70s oil crisis when the price of gasoline and oil shot up. And so during the summer, you could buy heating oil cheaper than in the winter. So you'd get big tanks. Usually to make the space, you'd bury them somewhere in your property, fill them up. Some people got like 1,000-gallon tanks. And that way you could buy it when it was cheap and then burn it all winter long.
So what were these tanks made out of? You know, they had to be buried.
They're made of steel.
But steel rusts. So they use like a special kind of steel?
Nope. They use steel.
Just regular old rusty steel.
Yes.
And they buried them.
In the ground.
Underground.
Right.
In the ground.
Right.
With where there's everything that's normally in the ground, like water.
Right. Moisture,
water.
Yeah. There is no easy way to know if a tank is leaking.
So you're saying that they do rust? That despite we knowing that we're going to put them in the ground and that they're made out of steel, and we didn't, do we coat them in something? It's just you're telling me it's just steel.
Yes.
Okay, and we buried them.
Yes,
in the ground. Okay, I just wanted to make sure because that sounded.
It sounded stupid.
A
right?
little stupid.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So you're probably wondering how big is this problem, right? Well, there's an estimated 1.2 million underground storage tanks in the United States, many of which were installed before new regulations went into effect in 1988. So corrosion and other factors such as improper installation, spills during product delivery, and piping failures have already caused more than 550,000 confirmed underground storage tank leaks nationwide.
So you're saying of the 1.2 million steel tanks that we buried underground, about half of them are confirmed known to have leaked.
Correct.
Okay. Wow, that was a dumb mistake. I'm glad that that's over.
Well, it's not over. Actually, there's 9,000 new leaks discovered every year. So the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, estimates that cleanup of petroleum spilled underground could cost more than $32 billion. And here's what they're leaking: benzene, toluene, MTBE, cadmium, xylenes, naphthalene, 1,2-diachlorothane, ethylbenzene, ethyl dibromide, PCBs, and lead, just to name a few.
Okay, so but these things, they're inspected, right? They're like, we put them in the ground, and then people come and they look at them, and they say, hey, I think this has been leaking, right?
You would think that. But of the 546,000 USTs that store petroleum and hazardous substances, in 2019, only 87,371 were inspected. So that's just 16% of them were inspected.
Because they kind of just do 16% every year, and so maybe over time you You get them all?
Well, we're going to see a little later that you don't get them all. But,
okay.
But no.
Okay, but it's okay. It's okay. It's fine that these leak, right? Because it's underground. And we, as humans, live above the ground. So if we're walking around and you pick something up off the ground, it's not going to be all covered in oil or naphthales or whatever. Don't worry about it. It's under the ground, right? We don't interact with this isn't Minecraft.
Okay, except that 51% of the U.S. population relies on groundwater as a source of drinking water. That's more than 160 million people.
Oh.
And get this, 1 gallon of petroleum can contaminate 1 million gallons of water. And 1 pinprick-size hole in an underground storage tank can leak 400 gallons of fuel a year. And you'll never pick up on that pin-sized prick until it's too late.
And most of the time, the hole's going to be a little bit bigger than that.
It'll start small and then it'll get bigger, yeah.
Okay, so that's bad because unlike what I said before,
it does affect us.
It does affect us because half the population of the U.S., at least, gets their water from groundwater.
Right.
And groundwater is water from the ground.
In the ground, very good.
Just to clear that up, just to make sure we understand. So can we just talk about the water table for a minute?
Sure.
So I never really understood this when I was a kid, but there's a thing called a water table.
Yep.
And underground, there is water.
Right. There's aquifers. And so when you drill a well, you either drill a shallow well and you get it from close to the water table, or you drill a deep well and you hit an aquifer and you pull the water up. And as you suck water out of the aquifer, you then, if there's a leaking gas tank somewhere nearby, you're just sucking that contamination right into the aquifer.
Because as you draw water up the well, more water needs to come in to displace it. So no matter what was dropped in there, whether it was a food dye that could somehow make its way through the ground, or oil, or some nasty chemical,
yep,
it's just coming towards your well. And so if you draw a lot of water, and let's say you're very far away, but you're drawing a lot of water, and there are many other wells between the leak and you could be drawing that.
Yeah, you just draw it, exactly. And the problem is most people don't test their well water very often. It's kind of a set it and forget it kind of thing, right? Most people don't even know they're on well water, to be honest. A lot of people in my town, for instance, don't even know where their water comes from. They just think, oh, it comes from the city. And some of it does, and some of it doesn't.
Right.
So they may not even know to check their well because they may not know that they have one.
Okay. But I mean, once you figure out that the tank is leaking, you just I assume there's just like hooks, and you just kind of get a small crane and you just pull it out of the ground and you're all set, right?
I love these wonderful assumptions.
Right?
So the average cost to remove a tank from the ground, if it hasn't leaked, is about $10,000.
Yikes. Okay. That's
if it hasn't leaked. If everything's still fine.
So you have to dig it up.
You got to dig it up. You got to get a backhoe. Hopefully it's not under your driveway.
And hopefully you've basically drained it, but you still have to clean out the residue.
Exactly.
And then you can remove it.
Yeah, you have to hire specialists to do this. This isn't like, Bob down the street.
And that's why it costs $10,000.
Right.
Okay, but
now, if it's a tank that's had a leak, then you're in a whole different ballgame here because you got to involve the authorities and specialists and so forth. And the average price of a leaking tank to get it out of the ground is $400,000.
Up to $400,000?
Nope, that's the average.
Average.
That's the average.
And
it could be a whole lot more than that depending on the size of the tank and the leak.
And who pays for that?
It depends. Most insurance companies won't pay for it. Most times it falls on the homeowner if it happens to be at a homeowner's house. If it happens to be at a gas station, then it's probably going to be the gas station responsible. Now, there are some federal funds to help with cleanup, but generally to start that whole process, you're talking about whoever owns the land.
And you might not have even necessarily been the person
who put it in. You might have bought a house, not really known much about what was going on with tanks and thought about it, whatever, and then you find, oh, you got a leaking fuel tank on your property.
And just to be clear, it's a steel tank.
Steel tank.
Full of oil.
Yep.
Somewhere on your property.
So way back in 1984, the U.S. government knew that underground storage tanks were leaking across the country. So Congress set up LUST. That's the Leaking Underground Storage Tank Trust Fund.
Oh, okay. That sounds like a weird mall store. But, okay.
It sounds like some staffer in the Congress really had some fun that day.
Okay. The Leaking Underground Storage Tank Trust Fund.
Yeah. So
it'd be more like LUST.
Yeah, but
we got to keep an acronym that we understand. Gotcha. LUST. Got it.
So did you know that every time you buy a gallon of gas in the United States, you're paying 1/10 of a penny into a fund to clean up the inevitable spills and leaks.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, that's a pretty good solution to the problem.
Well, I mean, it's kind of sad. They knew it was going to happen, so they did it. And so
Right.
the EPA spent billions of dollars over the next 30 years from 1984 on, and they cleaned up 488,000 leaking tanks. So that's great that they cleaned them up, right?
Awesome.
But the government only spends a fraction of what they collect to clean up the contaminated sites. It collects $300 million a year, but it only spends about $100 million a year on cleanup, even though we still have 100,000 leaking tanks left to go.
Okay, well, that's good. That must mean that there's just a big pot of money sitting in some federal account somewhere, just ready. We just need to hire a bunch of people, use this money that we've been saving up for all this time,
Yep.
and just take care of the problem.
Except they've slowed way down because these remaining sites are some of the more expensive and more difficult sites to clean up. So they kind of went after the easy ones first, and now we got a lot of tough ones left. And the sad news is that there's 9,000 new leaking ones that we find every year. So it's not like we're getting smaller and smaller. We're actually getting bigger and bigger. And the problem is, you just mentioned a pot of money, right? So Congress loves pots of money. And so what do? Well, Congress keeps stealing money from Lust to pay for other things. So for instance,
Wait, Congress, you mean they put on some masks and
Kinda.
they slink down to the wherever they keep the money and they steal it out, and what do they do? And they just eat it? What do they do?
No. So in 2012, for instance, they transferred $2.4 billion from the Lust Fund to pay for other things in transportation, like roads.
Even though that's not what it was meant to
It
do.
was meant to be just for cleaning up spills and tanks.
And there's other parts of the gas tax that are supposed to be paid for.
Yeah.
roads
I mean,
as well.
most of the rest of the gas tax is supposed to pay for that. But exactly. So they basically, that's why I'm saying they stole it, because it wasn't meant for anything else other than underground storage tank cleanup.
Why don't they just hang on? Why don't they just raise the gas tax 1/10 of a cent?
How dare you raise the gas tax?
I'm just saying-
We have not raised
If
the
it-
gas tax in this country for decades.
I'm just saying, if they need to
Since
take,
you've been alive, we have not touched the gas tax.
even though inflation has happened.
Yes.
Okay, but $2.4 billion transferred from the Lust Fund, which is supposed to go towards something that they haven't fixed yet. It'd be one thing, right, if we
Well-
were like, well, we fixed it,
But
right?
here, do you see potholes every day when you're driving?
Uh-huh.
Do you see underground storage tanks every day while you're driving?
No.
No, that's what I'm talking about. Out of sight, out of mind. So Americans complain all the time about, roads are falling apart, which they are. So Congress
It's okay
went,
that you're complaining about that. That makes
so Congress
sense.
went, we got to pay for that. Where can we get some money? Hey, let's take it from some place that no one's ever going to notice. So the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, reported in 2007, for instance, that it will cost $12 billion to clean up the remaining leaking tanks.
The remaining leaking tanks.
Right.
And we
as
find
said, there's more ones every
9,000
year.
more every year.
Right.
Okay, great.
So there's a backlog of 130,000 cleanups at active federally regulated USTs. So these are places where the government knows about, 130,000 sites that the government knows about. But get this, there are 76,000 closed USTs, so tanks that are no longer being used, that have not been inspected. They're just sitting there and we don't know what's happened there. They could have leaked, and there could be a whole lot of contamination that needs to be cleaned up, but we don't know. And additionally, there's 190,000 unregistered USTs. So these are tanks that went in the ground that no one ever told anyone about. And so the government doesn't even know they exist, and so they have not been inspected because we don't know where they are.
Okay. All right. That's super dumb. All of this was dumb.
Yes.
Basically, from the moment they put the shovel in the ground to stick a steel tank in the ground to fill it, not with just like water. They put oil in there.
Yep. So every gas station you see put in since 1988 has double wall tanks, and they're usually fiberglass, and they're usually interstitial so that they have alarms, so that if the first tank leaks, an alarm goes off.
Fiberglass tanks.
So that's a lot smarter, right?
Fiberglass doesn't rust.
Right.
Why didn't we do that to begin with?
Well, because it's expensive to put in a double wall tank with alarms. So,
You know what else is expensive? Cleaning up these freaking leaks.
but you're going to be dead. Like if you in 1988, you're a middle-aged person, you put in a tank. Right now,
it won't leak until you're dead.
You're close to
Wow.
dead, probably. So,
Perfect.
what do you care?
What a perfect solution.
Just leave
that is.
the Earth behind to the next generation.
It's good.
Yeah, so this whole UST topic is just another example of the hidden costs of fossil fuels. When you pump gas in your internal combustion engine ICE car and you pay, let's say, $2.67 a gallon, you are not paying the full cost of that gasoline. You are not paying for the leaking tanks that are contaminating groundwater. You are not paying for the adverse health effects of drinking that water. And you're not paying for the adverse health effects of the air pollution from your tailpipe emissions or the greenhouse gas emissions and those costs to warming our planet.
So when people say that we can't afford building all these turbines and batteries and solar panels, it's just too expensive. Well, you just ask them. Can we afford all of these thousands of leaking underground storage tanks? Billions of dollars of ticking time bombs that will be poisoning our water for decades to come? Who's going to pay for that? Solar panels and wind turbines don't poison our water or pollute our air. So going forward, are we going to keep putting underground storage tanks in the ground? Is that really that was a good solution? Can we not learn from this and go, oh, maybe that was dumb? Maybe we should be thinking about all sorts of different things when we're installing things that have stuff in them. Maybe we should know where those things are, just in case something bad happens to them.
Yeah, and this is just another one of those subsidies that we don't talk about. The federal government is taking your tax dollars every time you buy gas and putting it into a fund to pay for the leaking tanks.
And then they don't spend it on that. They spend it on the roads,
right? Because
they haven't raised the gas tax since I've been born.
And yet they blame EVs, and it's like, oh, there should be EV taxes to pay for the roads.
Right. And it's like, okay, maybe we should all be paying a higher tax rate to pay for the roads, since the roads aren't fixed.
Right.
I mean, let's just be honest.
But, I mean, EVs don't have any of these costs involved with them. They don't pollute the air. They don't pollute the water.
Right. You don't go to a gas station. And, again, this is where renewable energy, we're going to put it in, and then we're going to be like, why is there more money in all of our pockets? Because you don't wake up one morning and you go outside and for some reason you've decided to dig something and you're like, oh no, there's a storage tank here and it's polluted all of my land. I mean, there are news stories where homeowners basically lose their house.
Yep.
The whole area surrounding their house and their house they have to pick up the house. They have to move it. They have to scrape all that stuff away, ship it somewhere. Who cares? And then put down new land. And then the homeowner's broke.
Yep.
Super broke because their insurance won't cover it. The world's broken. And fossil fuels are a huge part of that problem. And it's just so frustrating. That's why we are talking about this. This is one little teeny, tiny problem that occurs when you have fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Because where are you going to keep them?
Underground.
Right. There's one gas station in a city nearby where they have the tanks above ground. And anytime I am driving along and someone sees that, they go, oh my God, that's really scary. It's like, yeah, at least we could see when it's leaking. And at least they're apparently made out of aluminum since they aren't rusting.
I hope.
They look like they were put in the 80s. It's just like, again, out of sight, out of mind. And there's so much of this out of sight, out of mind stuff when it comes to PM 2.5 particulates, when it comes to CO2 emissions.
Yep.
When it comes to asthma, I mean, most of the time you're not seeing that stuff.
Nope.
So anyway, just a little thing to bring to you this week. Please share this with your friends because, I don't know, this makes me want to... It's a good thing you knew where your tanks were because I want to break out I
know.
just to make sure there's none on your property.
I know, right?
Yikes.
Scary stuff.
All right. Well, thank you so much for watching. Now you know.